Welcome to the 360 Teaching and Learning Podcast, an all-round look at student-centered education. I'm Adrian Pumphrey, and this week we talk with best-selling author and Associate Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, Dr. John Ratey. We discuss how movement and exercise are essential ingredients for effective teaching and learning. Enjoy the episode. Well, Dr. John Ratey, thank you so much for joining us on the 360 Teaching and Learning Podcast.
Great to be with you. Love your school, love Indianapolis.
Question for you. I know you know a lot about wellness and learning and the brain. We've heard many times that exercise is good for us from many different angles, many different people. What is it that we don't know yet about exercise? What are we just learning now about the benefits of exercise?
Well, I say that exercise is a great benefit for the brain, and the effects on the body are just welcome side effects. So the major reason that we need to exercise is our world is so different from when our brains evolved. Mm-hmm. We evolved during the time of the hunter-gatherers. That's when our brains became big. And during that time, we were moving all the time, and we needed to. And we added we grew our big brain. We added new brain cells to help us be better movers. So when we got a little more complicated, got language, got bigger social groups, the brain cells that we added to help us move more precisely, more planfully, more sculpted movements, we use to think with and to speak with. So what we know is that our thinking brain is really the evolutionary internalization of movement. Our moving brain is our thinking brain. So that when we move, we are activating, we are sparking our thinking brain and all that means.
So conversely, when we are sitting still and not moving at all, then we are not activating our brains.
Right. We're in danger of eroding our brains. And that's the hell of it. So, and especially in our world today, and especially during COVID or post-COVID or whatever COVID this is we're in, who knows? Danger is we're going to be sitting more. And I know myself, Zooming all the time and having to, and it's wonderful, but boy, is it not the same as being in the classroom. See, you guys are back in school, in classes. Mm-hmm. Harvard, the students are back, but our faculty is still doing a lot of our stuff remotely, which is a pain, as you know.
Yeah. So what exactly happens in the brain when we exercise?
Well, what happens is when you move your muscles and then you move yourself in space and all that, your brain is on fire. So think of this. When you move, you activate more brain cells than in any other human activity. And we think of the brain as a muscle now. The more we use it, the better it gets. And the stronger it gets, the more connected it gets. So when you move, your brain cells are clicking away. That means they're firing. That means they're active. And when they're active, lots of good stuff happens. It extrudes neurotransmitters that you've all heard of, serotonin for one, dopamine, some of you. But serotonin, most people have heard of that because it's related to our antidepressants, or a fashionable antidepressants, I should say. But all these neurotransmitters are important to help our brain work well. As well, we have these neurohormones. And if, when I grew up in medical school and all during the Boston Marathon, the heyday, when it began to explode. And we learned that during marathon running, especially around mile 18 or 19, you get what's called an endorphin rush. Most people have heard of the endorphin rush who are cognizant and exercisers. Oh, I need to raise my endorphins. Because what's endorphins? Endorphins are our body's own morphine-like substances, literally like morphine. That's where our endorphin areas in the brain that bind the endorphins is where morphine binds. And so what does that mean? So when you're at mile 18 and you're struggling to get to 23, you forget about it. You don't have the pain that you're going to have tomorrow, because you get this rush of endorphins, which dulls the pain and makes you feel really good. And so you're able to push up Heartbreak Hill, and you're able to get to the end of the marathon. And this is what happens when you do a new exercise in gym and you push through it. You don't stop because of pain usually. You don't feel it until 24 hours later when you have the pain comes back. Because when you're doing that, when you're doing a new exercise, you're breaking new muscle fibers, basically. Small, but breaking them. And this leads to the release of endorphins and endocannabinoids, which block the pain response. Now, you think of it evolutionarily. When we were doing something new way back in the day, we had better not stop because we're going to get eaten by the cats, or we're going to not finish our task and die. So we had to persevere. So we had to block out the pain or any kind of disturbance to keep going, to do it, to complete the task. Well, that goes away. And so in a day or so, your muscles could be screaming, because you no longer have those, our own pain blockers. And along the way, not only do they block pain, but they make us feel good. So one of the reasons why we feel better after we exercise is this rush of those endorphins, the endocannabinoids, but also a whole host of other factors, the neurotransmitters. So, for instance, taking a bout of exercise is like taking, I say, a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Ritalin, because it does the same thing. And I mean an antidepressant and a stimulant. It could be Adderall or Zoloft, whatever the current fad is in our medicines. And that's important, because we have all this evidence to show that exercise is as good as our antidepressants. And if we do it enough and continuous enough, for 3 or 4 times a day of exercise, you can get away with not using a stimulant if you need a stimulant for attention deficit disorder. But it's impractical unless you live in an area where you can be outside all the time. It's a problem.
Bringing it into the classroom at this point, what do you think the implications are for teaching and learning? Clearly, there's some significant implications here. What have you seen, and what's the potential?
Well, potential is always a problem, because we have 50,000 school boards in the United States. And so you can't say, let's just change. But the implications are great. In my book, Spark, the first chapter, I talk about the school system in Naperville, Illinois. where 19,000 kids were in this big school district. And they started this program, evolved this unbelievable PE program, a daily PE program, where they were focused on fitness. Well, this was great. It led to them. I learned about them when they had been measured, and only 3% of them, 3% of the 19,000 kids, were overweight. The average at that point was 33% in the United States. They had no kids in the high school that were obese. The 7,500 kids in the two big high schools, none, because they had come through this program where it was PE was daily, and it was focused on getting the kids fit, and boy, did they. What was exciting about it, though, was that some years before this measurement took place, 99% of the kids took the TIMSS test, the International Science and Math Test, which every country takes every 3 years. And we in the United States always come in the low teens or high teens. They took it as a country, which you could do. And they came in number 1 in the world in science and number 6 in math.
Wow.
So not only were they among the fittest kids in the world, but they were among the smartest. And this is where they competed with, usually in the top 5 are all the Asian countries and Finland.
Right.
And maybe you know a little bit about Finland because they're one of my favorite places to enlighten people about, because they really believe in movement in this very frigid, in our minds, country. They get the kids moving 15 minutes every class. 45 minutes of seat time, 15 minutes of play or exercise. And what happens? Well, they have a lot better adjusted kids. They score among the highest in the world. They don't do cram schools like our Asian friends, where they're studying all the time, and it's really quite remarkable. So what implications do exercise have? I mean, we have so much evidence that exercise makes for a better learner. Gets the child in their seat, stops the fidgeting, improves their attention, improves their motivation. All this we know. We know that this happens. Also, it helps people especially people who have different brains. ADHD, dyslexia, autistic spectrum people. Exercise is the best thing they can do. I spent a lifetime writing about ADHD and exercise, both, and know that exercise is one way to help our ADHD brains work best.
So you've been talking about exercise and this you've been using it as a sort of a singular term, and I'm wondering, when we break it up and think about types of exercise, are there certain types of exercise that are better for activating that learning brain, or do they all kind of feed into the same
What would you
place?
think is the best exercise? I'll put you on the spot.
Oh boy.
No, what would you think?
Well, if my students come to me first period and they're still kind of sleepy, I make them run up and down the stairs.
Okay.
So I make them do the aerobic exercise.
Right.
But I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I feel like when I do like yoga, I feel like I'm like accessing a different part of my brain than necessarily if I'm doing aerobic or anaerobic or like a HIIT workout. Like I feel like that it feels like there's a different impact, but I guess I'm wondering if there actually is.
No, there is, especially because you're doing more balance issues. But you're still doing a fairly aerobic workout if you're doing yoga. But The answer to the question is that all exercise improves the brain's activity. The question is, what's the best? Well, probably the best should surprise you, because it's probably dance.
That's not surprising, actually. I was thinking about if you do one of those dance hip hop abs.
Yep.
Shout out to hip hop abs. But when you do it, because you've got the coordination of your body, but you have to really think, and you have to listen to the music, and
a partner.
Yeah.
And you have a partner.
You got to focus in a totally different way than just go run 3 miles.
Yes, you got it. Dance is incredible. Just as you said, dance involves so much of our brain. And this is the point. The whole business of movement and exercise, and why it's so important, is because when we move, we are activating more brain cells than any other human activity. And if you add on to that thinking and changing and responding in dance to the music, or, pray tell, another partner or a group that you're involved with, think of how much brain stuff is being activated and challenged. Because when you activate and challenge your brain cells, you extrude all these great chemicals, as well as when you get to the higher elevations, the anaerobic, and you can certainly get anaerobic when you're dancing, when you just lose yourself into it. You make a lot more other stuff happen, including you get a whole bunch of nitrous oxide, which is something that we know it's a neurotransmitter kind of thing, but it also does wonderful things for your blood supply in your brain, and makes you feel, it's a very good antidepressant, and it makes you feel great, as well as it activates the young hormones to make us young when you get to that high level. So you're doing it, you're having fun, which is very important for exercise that will last for you. You're having fun, you're loving it, you're enjoying the music, you're enjoying your partner, and your brain is on fire. And when your brain's on fire, it promotes growth. Just as when you exercise and you're moving your muscles and you're growing more muscle cells, you're growing more muscle connections. Well, with exercise, you're doing the same thing. And now we know, since 1999, that just all of us in living, we will make new brain cells every day. And this is not something that we knew before 1999. We have stem cells in our brain that get changed into new brain cells. Well, the reason why this is so important with exercise is that the best intervention to make new brain cells is exercise. We make more new brain cells when we're exercising, again, than in any other human activity. So not only are you making the best in what we call microenvironment in your brain for their cells there, the 100 billion cells that we have, to do what they're supposed to do, which is grow, but you're actually adding more new brain cells, especially in an area called the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that's all about memory and learning and controlling stress. So when we exercise, we're adding more help to that area. And that's a simple way to say it, but that's exactly what happens.
That's exciting. We've talked about exercising before learning, and then you talked about Finland, where they take breaks between sitting down and learning. What about exercising during learning? So have you seen the benefits of movement and exercise during learning activities?
Yes, and the Netherlands have, about 4 years ago, did sort of a big national study in a focus of one university, where they did just that. They had kids move while they were learning new math concepts or new words to memorize. And it was remarkable. They did one school that was moving during this period, and it was only 5 minutes of movement during when they were getting the toughest issues, versus other schools. And they did this for a year, and they tested them, and those that had the intervention did that much better than those that didn't. But there was a social justice thing they found too, because to begin with, kids that were immigrants, mainly Turkish kids, were much less able to stay on task, time on task, than the Dutch. After a year of this movement while they were learning, their scores on what's called time on task was exactly the same as the Dutch.
Wow.
So they improved, categorically improved their time on task.
What does that look like? I mean, like, they're not on treadmills in a classroom.
No.
So what is it?
No, they're getting
what
up
does it
and
really
moving.
look?
They're getting up and moving. They're doing jumping jacks. They're doing squats. They're doing
Like while the teacher is teaching.
while they're saying the words or saying the concepts or trying to understand the concepts. Even further, that while you're moving, there was a big study out of Stanford years ago, where they got 100 probably Psych 101 students in Stanford who were guinea pigs, and they tested them on 5 different measures of creativity. So they came in, sat down, and did these evaluations. Then the next time they came in, they had them do this while they were moving, while they were taking a 10-minute walk. Then the next week they came in and they had them walk for 10 minutes and then do the test. The hypothesis going in is that that their best scores would be after they moved. That wasn't the case. It was during the movement that their scores were the best. Now, they were much better than sitting after moving, but even better while moving. Now, this wasn't HIIT or any of that. They weren't stressing them. They were walking. So they were moving, but they weren't, going overboard. Because when you really stress the body and the brain, there's too much blood flowing everywhere, and you take blood away from the brain a bit, so you're not going to have. It's not the best time to learn new words, and the same way in the Netherlands, they weren't. It was 5 minutes at a time. It wasn't something that was completely demanding so much blood everywhere else in the body.
So in the past, we've heard that, for example, meditation can be a very good thing to do, for example, before assessments, to help calm down the body and the mind. On a surface level, one might hear all this and think, well, this feels kind of like the opposite to that. We're sort of, almost winding ourselves up, trying to boost our energy through movement and exercise. And you couldn't be blamed for asking the question of like, well, which is it? Should we put our heads down and meditate, or should we be up and exercising?
Well, but meditation, if done properly, is really quite an active brain process. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. You're really activating the brain quite a bit to calm it down, to try to empty it, which is the ultimate in meditation, right? Mm-hmm. Just to empty the brain of all thoughts. Well, that demands quite a lot of brain activity, just like exercise. So there is a great similarity between the two states.
So as teachers, how can we take this information and change our practice?
Yes. That's the big issue. How do you integrate this in the classroom? Well, you do it just as you said earlier. What do you do when your kids come in and they're tired? You have them run up and down the stairs. Well, you start that way, or break. You take a 3-minute break. There was one teacher, 5th grade teacher in Wyoming, who won the Teacher of the Year in Wyoming. And what he did is that every 15 minutes he had a minute exercise break in the class, and they got up and danced, or they did jumping jacks, or they did squats. And the kids loved it. Mm-hmm. The kids loved it. And then they extended it sometimes to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and they would get up and dance and move around. And so 5th graders, which is a tough grade, as you know, they look forward to coming to class. They wanted to come to class, and their scores went way up. So there's different ways to do it. But if you don't program it in, that's hard. It's hard, to not have it automatically show up as something to do a 2-minute break. Stand up, do some squats, do some jumping jacks, do some lunges, do whatever. Just right there at their desks. They don't have to get out, they don't have to sweat too much.
I'm also thinking of the student, were I to start this tomorrow, there'll be students that will just be like, I'm not doing that. And, it might take a while for them to get into it.
It's always the case. Yeah. I mean, the big thing about introducing exercise in the school, when we were doing it a lot when I was participating, is in junior high was a big problem. And why? With the girls. Why? Because of hair. Their hair. It was a hard thing for them to think of taking a shower. If they were really doing a full-on gym class, their PE class, where they were running and active, and they were sweating. You want that, and so the big problem was the hair, and unless you're in a place like Naperville where it was part of the culture, by the time I arrived, there was no question about it. Didn't matter whether you didn't want to do it. You just did it. You had to do it. It was part of the deal. Mm-hmm. So it has to be involved in the community. So and it's tough sledding changing anything. Mm. You guys know that. I mean, because you'll get something, most teachers, maybe in private schools not, but most teachers in the state will have this idea. Okay, you got to do this now, and now it's SEL. Right? Now it's social-emotional learning. You got to have a segment in, and where's it going to go? You have to change your schedule. Well, the last thing you want to do is add some more stuff. Mm-hmm. But this is a way of improving your learner with just a little bit of time. Improving your learner, not necessarily making them smarter, although you will, but you'll make a better learner.
For very little input.
Very little input, and hopefully fun. That's the hope, is that you do the exercise and people love it. People have fun. I did it with your sixth graders today, had them do Hindu squats and pull in their arms to their chest real hard and shout. They love the shouting. And then go down and touch the floor. But, so, you have to do something creative so that it gets the kids engaged.
What are those, thinking of the school like in Naperville, and you've talked about schools in, I think, South Carolina that you've been involved with as well. And what are those confounding factors that we need to think about? What are sort of environmental things that we need to put in place for introducing exercise to be a success, rather than a fad or a trend that kind of drifts away?
Well, I think the proof's always in the pudding, right? I mean, in other words, once you begin and you show the gain for that year, that will promote the acceptance for the next year a bit. But then you need, what I say, every school that we needed to change, we needed a bulldog. We needed somebody who was really into doing this in the school, in the classroom, and sort of reminding people. Because, I've seen so many schools get a lot of money to do this, and they do it for 2 years, and then it changes, and their money runs out, or their enthusiasm runs dry, and they have a whole new curriculum that they have to deal with, whatever. So, like they bought all this equipment, it sits on the shelf. The whole program sits on the shelf. So you need someone who believes in it and is going to be there and has the energy and the will and the goodwill to sustain whatever intervention you do. And the good news is that in Naperville, for instance, and in Pennsylvania, where they're up in the Rust Belt of school in Pennsylvania, Titusville, there was a teacher who was persistent, who carried the torch year to year. And once they saw, hey, their test scores are above the mean, and they were below the mean before. Oh my God, why? Well, they had a climbing wall, and they had PE every day, and there was no, the big thing, you guys don't have to worry about this at Park Tudor, but they realized that they hadn't had a fist fight in 2 years since they started PE, every day and focused on fitness first. No fist fights in amongst 6th to 9th graders. In a lower middle class school, no fist fights. Amazing.
Well, unfortunately, that's about all we've got time for today. But with our new wellness center opening, and with our new wellness programs that have just launched, I know this is very topical for us. We have a lot to think on after today. So, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all you've done for the educational field and all you're doing. And thank you for joining us on this episode.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Good to be with you.
That was Dr. John Ratey, best-selling author and associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. For more information on works from Dr. Ratey, do check out our show notes at 360podcast.org. If you've enjoyed today's episode, you can help us get the word out by leaving us a 5-star review at itunes.com. See you next time. The 360 Teaching and Learning podcast is produced by Park Tudor School. Our executive producer is Brent Kenneth, and our editor is Adrian Pumphrey. To listen to previous episodes of the 360 Teaching and Learning podcast, head to 360podcast.org or subscribe by searching for 360 Teaching and Learning wherever you get your podcasts.